Jonathan leaned against the car, staring at the old house with an inexplicable heaviness in his chest. Shaw. It had been years since he'd seen this place, years since he'd left behind the town that once felt like home. But now, standing here with his wife, Sarah, and their two kids, the house felt strange, unfamiliar, as if time had erased all the memories he had once held dear. He glanced at Sarah, who was busy unloading the luggage from the trunk, and then at the kids, running around the yard, their laughter a stark contrast to the tension building in Jonathan's stomach. It was supposed to be a fresh start, moving back to this small town, away from the noise and rush of city life. Jonathan had thought the move would give them a chance to breathe, to rebuild. But there was one thing he hadn't expected, something he'd tried so hard to forget: Chris. The name still haunted him, a bitter reminder of a friendship torn apart. He hadn't seen Chris in years, but the memory of their last argument still stung like a fresh wound. The argument had been over something stupid, something small, yet it had torn them apart in a way that neither of them could repair. Jonathan had tried to bury it, to move on with his life, but no matter how far he went, the past always found a way of catching up. That afternoon, as he stood outside the house, trying to breathe through the suffocating weight of his past, he saw a figure at the fence. His heart skipped a beat as the familiar face of Chris appeared, leaning on the wooden post just a few feet away. The years had changed them both, but there was no mistaking the man standing before him. Chris. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just stared at each other as if the years had dissolved all the words between them. Chris had aged, of course. His hair was longer now, his face more weathered. But his eyes, those same eyes that Jonathan had once trusted with his deepest secrets, were the same. Finally, Chris broke the silence. "Didn't think you'd be back," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. Jonathan forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, well, I didn't think I'd ever come back either." There was an awkward silence, the kind that made Jonathan feel exposed, like he was standing in front of a mirror, seeing the cracks in his own soul. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words felt stuck. Chris, however, didn't seem to be bothered by the silence. He just kept looking at Jonathan, as if waiting for him to speak first. Finally, Jonathan exhaled, the tension in his chest building to a breaking point. "I never thought we'd end up like this, Chris." Chris nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the ground. "Neither did I. But here we are." The weight of their past hung between them, thick and suffocating. Jonathan's mind flashed back to their last conversation, the one that had torn their friendship apart. He could still hear the words, the angry accusations, the way Chris had slammed the door as he left. "I'm sorry, man," Jonathan said quietly, surprising even himself. "I should have never let it go like that. I should have fought for us." Chris didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced at the fence again, his eyes focused on the horizon. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I thought you didn't care anymore." The words hit Jonathan like a punch to the gut. He hadn't known. He hadn't realized how much Chris had felt abandoned, how much his own silence had hurt him. Jonathan had been so focused on his own life, his own struggles, that he hadn't seen the pain in his best friend's eyes. And now, all of a sudden, the years apart seemed like a lifetime wasted. "Chris," Jonathan started, but his voice faltered. "I never stopped caring." Chris looked up at him then, his face softening, the anger and resentment of the past years slowly melting away. "I didn't either, you know, but I didn't know how to reach out anymore. I thought you had moved on." They stood there for a long moment, the years of silence pressing in on them. Then Chris spoke again, his voice low but firm. "I never wanted to be the one to walk away, but I couldn't fix it alone. Neither of us could." Jonathan nodded, his mind racing. The pieces of their fractured friendship were finally starting to fit together. But there was something more, something deeper they hadn't touched yet. He had never asked Chris why he left so abruptly, why he'd stopped responding to texts, why he hadn't tried to fix things either. The more Jonathan thought about it, the more he realized how much he didn't know. "Chris," Jonathan began, his voice breaking slightly. "What happened? Why did you disappear? What did I miss?" Chris hesitated, then ran a hand through his hair, looking over at the old house. "I guess I thought I had to get away from everything, from you, from the past. I I don't know how to explain it. I just couldn't face it anymore." Jonathan's heart sank. "But we were friends. We should have talked about it." "I know," Chris said, his voice barely a whisper, "but I didn't know how to talk to you. I didn't know how to talk to anyone. It was easier to run." For the first time in years, Jonathan felt the weight of their silence beginning to lift. He could see now that their rift wasn't just about that one argument. It was about things they hadn't said, the things they hadn't faced. They had both been running from something, something bigger than their fight. Jonathan took a deep breath and stepped closer to the fence, reaching out a hand. "I think we both owe each other an apology." Chris hesitated, but then, with a faint smile, he shook Jonathan's hand. "Yeah, I think we do." They stood there, side by side, looking at the house in front of them. The years that had passed between them seemed to shrink in that moment, replaced by the understanding that their friendship hadn't been destroyed. It had just been buried, waiting to be uncovered. As Jonathan looked at Chris, he knew there was still work to do. The past couldn't be undone in one conversation, but this was the first step. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was a road worth walking together again. True friendship isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about facing it, understanding each other, and growing together. Reconciliation doesn't come easily, but it's the first step toward healing. Have you ever had a falling out with a close friend? What would it take for you to reconnect and heal the past? Share your thoughts in the comments. How do you think true friendship can be restored? Reconciliation doesn't come easily, but it's the first step toward healing. Have you ever had a falling out with a close friend? What would it take for you to reconnect and heal the past? Share your thoughts in the comments. How do you think true friendship can be restored?